we think about our physical body or our physical health, I'll often say, how often do you go to the dentist? We belong to gyms, we work out, and I know I go to a dermatologist and endocrinologist. I have all these doctors that I go to, but the brain is always thought of like something you don't even talk about unless there's something wrong.
That's Dee O'Neill, and this is the Powerful Ladies Podcast. Hey guys, I'm your host, Cara Duffy, and this is the Powerful Ladies Podcast, where I invite my favorite humans, the awesome, the up to something, and the extraordinary to come and share their story. I hope that you'll be left entertained, inspired, and moved to take action towards living your most powerful life. As those of you who are regular listeners already know, I am a total nerd. I love learning, I love reading, I love geeking out over how the world works and the incredibly cool patterns that exist and connect us all. On this episode, I had the pleasure of sitting down with one of my new favorite and fascinating people, Dee O'Neill. Dee loves nerding out too, and her specialty is the brain. She's studied it. She's been part of very cool brain research projects. She's worked with executives on brain optimization. She works with mental health and brain health in her private practice and more. In this episode, we discuss why she's committed to normalizing routine checkups for our brain, why it matters, and how taking care of our brains may be the path to living beyond 100. All that and so much more coming up, but first, if you're interested in discovering what possibilities and businesses are available for you to create and to live your most fulfilling life, please visit thepowerfulladies.com/coaching and sign up for a free coaching consultation with me. There is no reason to wait another day to not be living your best life, when you instead could be running at full speed towards your wildest dreams today. Well, I am so excited that you are here today.
Well, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with you today. I wish I was actually with you, but at least here with you is great.
I know. I really miss recording in studio. There's benefits to recording remotely like this. Obviously, there's a lot less prep and driving that I have to do to get sorted. But it's so nice to be in the same space with people. And I think we're all craving that right now.
So true.
Well, I'd love to begin by telling the audience who you are and what you're up to in the world.
Okay. So Dee O'Neill, you may know that already. What am I up to in the world? It's sort of a crazy, interesting, exciting, I think, unknown time, I think, for many of us, and I'm included in that bucket for sure. Of course, we met through the endeavor with Lifeology and Yoga, which we might talk about. Right before that, just the way the universe works, right before that, I had gotten laid off from a 7-year-long run with a role through the University of Texas at Dallas, and kind of always was ready to launch, focus more on my private practice, which I've had much longer. And so that was sort of like the nudge, the big nudge to do that and to kind of take that leap. So in the beginning, it was kind of like the grief process was shocking, but now it's really still super kind of scary and shocking, but exciting because I'm really focusing on my private practice, which is focusing on brain health and fitness, mostly speaking to groups and companies. And I started doing it virtually when COVID started and didn't know how it would go. And I find that I love it almost more than, maybe not more than, but equally as much as live shows or live talks. And then also just working with clients one-on-one, using all of my brain mapping and other neurotechnology tools. So that's the current. It could change in a few months because who knows where it's going. But right now, focusing on my practice and mainly public speaking.
Mm-hmm. And I met you, as you mentioned, through taking Yoga together, which is a neuro brain science yoga application. There's none other that exists in the whole world, which is very exciting. And it's basically applying brain science to all the principles of yoga so that it can be elevated, and really working with clients at a different level, either who have anxiety, depression, or have experienced trauma. So whether you're a therapist applying yoga or a yogi trying to be able to connect with a client at a different level. And you were a phenomenal Weekend 2 teacher teaching us all about brain science. So in my head, you are like the brain expert of the universe. How did
I'm going to
you
use
get
that title.
You should. That's just the new LinkedIn, brain science of the universe. How did you get into brain science?
Oh gosh. I know when people ask me that, I kind of go, oh my God, how did I get into this? Because it's so like everything I do. If you could see my bookcase, it's all brain books. I mean, that's just what I do. But it really started, I think, back when I lived in Hawaii. I lived in Hawaii for about 20 years. Graduate school, Chaminade University, studying psychology. I thought kind of going down this licensed counselor track. And I took both a statistics course and then also I guess it was kind of a neurochemistry course and a psychometric course. So doing testing to then diagnose people with different disorders. And I just became fascinated with the brain behavior relationship and sort of how they affect each other and impact each other. And then right out of there, got a job working in HIV dementia research. So people infected with AIDS and HIV dementia have a very specific way it affects the brain. And so I was able to do testing for a research study that was both HIV positive, but also negative, pilot groups. And then I got to sit in with a medical doctor doing spinal taps and just all that. I just got immersed in this world of neuroscience and just kind of never looked back from there. That was my graduate degree. And so ever since then, I spent many years doing neuropsychological testing. So sitting with people for 8 hours, all the intelligence, achievement, personality tests, and then kind of giving them a whole report of here's all the things, wrong, quote unquote. I have the air quotes going, all the things wrong. And then here are some suggestions, good luck. And at some point, maybe about 10 years ago, I decided I want to be on the solution side. Like, I don't want to just be telling people what's wrong, but I want to work with healthy people and help them elevate and advance their already really healthy brain. Because I think there's such a market for that, especially in today's corporate world of stress and burnout and just the busyness of our lives. So the focus the last 10 years or so has been more on the preventive and kind of more proactive side of it.
Yeah. And if you look back at 8-year-old self, would 8-year-old you have thought you would become the, master of brain science in the universe?
Of the universe? I don't think I had the universe in mind. Actually, at 8 years old, I think I wanted to be a veterinarian, just loved animals. And even through college, I think that's so interesting to think about how the paths we take and how we evolve over just life experiences. Because even through college, I thought I would, either do physical therapy or just fitness. Like I was more like all about the body. And then somehow when I got into the brain science, I just couldn't separate the two. And now I see how they're so interconnected. So the 8-year-old might be like, boy, this is boring, but at the same time, fascinated by it. Because I think when I work with little kids and teaching them about it, because I think we should teach little kids about their brains too. They're usually like, wow, that's really cool.
Well, and so many people, to your point, have no idea how their brain works or it's influenced or how to try to influence it in themselves.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions or things that you, in contrast, wish people knew about their brains?
Well, you're asking really good questions. I think that I'm always surprised when people come up to me after a 1,000, 2,000 people keynote. And actually, I gave a talk about a week ago, and people can't come up to you anymore, so it feels weird. You have to just like exit stage left and like be gone. But when people used to be able to line up and ask questions, I would often at every talk have people say things like I just never thought about my brain before. And I could almost see this almost like disbelief of like, I had no idea. And because I think about it like all the time, that's what I just, personally and professionally am sort of, am passionate with and obsessed with a little bit. I'm always surprised that people don't think about it. Whereas we think about our physical body or our physical health, I'll often say, how often do you go to the dentist? A couple times a year. We work out. Most of us are pretty physically, we belong to gyms, we work out. And I know I go to a dermatologist and endocrinologist. I have all these doctors that I go to, but the brain is always thought of like something you don't even like talk about unless there's something wrong. And so that's kind of the conversation I hope will shift, is like, just like we take care and manage and optimize and maintain all our other body parts and pieces, that our brain, because it's ultimately who we are, is in that same category, that we're measuring it regularly. We know how it's performing. We find what's working well and areas that we can improve. And then the tools and the resources are available to people to be able to make it better.
Yeah. Because I mean, I just went and got a blood panel, which is kind of a routine physical thing. How far off do you think we are where a brain scan or a brain measurement of some kind is included in a yearly physical? Is that 20 years down the road, 1 year?
Gosh, when I first got into this field, we were saying it's probably 10, 20 years. And I feel like we're closer, but it still feels, I work with a lot of really forward-thinking doctors here in Dallas and even more nationally who see the benefit of it. Years ago when I started, it's one of the very specific patterns that we can see, for example, is ADHD. There's a very distinct pattern of attention deficit in the brain, particularly the frontal lobes. And so for many years, we were saying we could look at the EEG, which is the electrical activity of the brain, and say this person has an excessive slow wave activity in the frontal lobe of their brain. And if they have that pattern, they'll respond well to a stimulant drug. If they don't have that slow wave, if they have fast wave, but it looks like attention problems, but really it's more anxiety, and you put that same person on the stimulant, then there's all kinds of problems. I'll often say, I've read stories of 7-year-olds dying by suicide because they've got an anxious brain, put on the stimulant, just goes into overdrive. So a lot of doctors are starting to read the science, because it's been around for a long time, but they're starting to notice it and see it. And so when they started recommending it, we in the EEG field knew for a long time, well, of course you can see that. And so I think as the research gets more robust and people just are more aware of it and accepting of it, it's just going to take, I think, a big shift in the paradigm of recognizing brain health as something that's not scary or to be avoided or ignored, but to embrace, just like athletes embrace having a coach, and sort of counseling is becoming more like coaching. And I think the brain science, and we'll often attribute, I'm sure you've seen commercials on TV where it's like train your brain, different apps or different games, things that are out there that are not really based on science, but they're still bringing awareness to, I can train my brain. I can do something about it. So it's advancing. I would say the field has advanced exponentially in the last 10 years. So I think in the next 10, it will exponentially advance again. So I think within a 10-year period, we'll have some kind of metric that can be done, definitely as an annual, but maybe even at home.
And for anyone who's listening, like the fact that one of my biggest takeaways from our weekend, and you spoke to it again, is that there should be a brain scan before giving kids any sort of drugs related to ADD, ADHD, that whole category of things before you do it. Hearing that in our weekend too, freaked me out. And I'm calling everyone I know who has kids on something. I'm like, get it checked. Because so many people, kids and adults, are diagnosed with that. And I would guess that most people don't have what they are taking drugs for. That probably applies physically too.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of an uphill battle, because we've just been programmed to think, I can just take a pill and fix things. And I just think it often doesn't. I mean, this is why we have more drugs available now than we ever did, but we have a bigger problem with diseases and with brain diseases and mental health issues. So obviously that's not the solution, but it just sounds like the easy solution. I used to have an old slide in one of my presentations that said exercise would be, easy in a pill, and it is a pill. It just takes 30 minutes to swallow. Yeah. So it's almost like there's just things that we have to do kind of as lifestyles, as habits that I think really can help drive our brains to optimal health, and then help inform when there's something actually going wrong. I'm not against medications for brain-based disorders, but I think it's often the first solution tried instead of the last solution. And I've seen that shift over the last 10 years with clients. Clients used to come to me after they tried everything and nothing worked, it even made it worse. And they're like, why am I just hearing about you? Whereas now what I'm seeing is people coming saying, okay, I heard about you. I'm thinking about medication, but I'm going to try this first. So to me, that feels like a huge step in the right direction.
Well, and the brain is so interesting because it overlaps with everyday functionality, intellect, emotions. There's so many layers to what is controlled and happening in there. So there's a lot of reasons to take care of it and a lot of reasons to not mess around with it either.
It's so true. Yeah. Today in our class, Lisa showed this video by Jill Bolte, I think is her name, but she wrote a book, My Stroke of Insight. And she was a neuroscientist who had a stroke. So she speaks to in her TED Talk, and her book is all about, waking up one morning and realizing like something's wrong. And then as a neuroscientist going, oh, wow, I'm having a stroke. Oh, this is crazy. Like recognizing how cool it is. But then also, as I said to the group, because they're like, well, Dee, what do you think about this? And I had seen that talk before. And to me, one of the most compelling things about it was, because I'd be the same way. If I suddenly knew I was having a stroke, I'd be like, this is so cool to get to like experience like where it is, what's going to happen. But then ignorance is bliss, because what you don't know can be helpful, because sometimes the more you know, the scarier it is. And that was my insight to the group today was I've been spending so many years looking at what's wrong with people's brains and what can go wrong with brain injuries and head injuries and Alzheimer's and cognitive decline. That it's sobering because it's such a delicate, fragile part of who we are, and it makes us who we are. I'll often say that, most body parts can now be, if one of us had an accident, we could be donors for hearts and livers and kidneys and everything except brains, because if I was in an accident and I got your brain, it'd be awesome, but I would be Kara. I wouldn't be Dee. I wouldn't be having my thoughts or my feelings. So it is truly what makes us who we are more than anything else. So I think it is so imperative that we do all we can to keep it healthy in a more proactive and preventive, really intentional, deliberate way.
We talked a lot about ways to keep our brain healthy in your weekend too. And one of them was the mind diet, which I don't think a lot of people actually know is out there.
Yeah.
So could you give a mini breakdown of what the mind diet is?
Yeah. So MIND, just like mind. And the mind diet is well established. It's a combination of the DASH diet, which is for heart health, and the Mediterranean diet, which has been really proven effective for brain health. So the DASH diet is a lot of what keeps our heart healthy. So it's similar to almost the brain. We always say what's good for the head is good for the heart, and vice versa. So it's less sugar, less fatty foods, more vegetables, kind of moderation of all things. And the Mediterranean, though, was very specific through studies done in the Mediterranean. So it's called the Mediterranean diet, because that's the area of a lot of these blue zones where people are living beyond 100, these centenarians that tend to live to 100 years and older. Without really knowing that they are doing that. They're just like generationally living much longer, healthy, happier lives. And there's a great book called Blue Zones, where the authors would go and find these people all over the world. There are a couple places in the US, but they're mostly international. And the things were like, they were physical. They tended to walk pretty far. They tended to have a lot of social interaction. But the biggest thing that they found was really just what they ate was so important. So in the Mediterranean, they might eat a lot of fish, not as much red meat. It's very plant-based, not as much sugar, processed foods. I'm almost startled every time I go to the grocery store now and I realize like everything's in a can or plastic, and you realize like everything we buy is just processed rather than like fresh fruit and fresh vegetables, and go fishing and get a fish and there's nothing processed about it. So we've just gotten away from that. And yet we have this whole brain and body disease sort of epidemic going on. So it's really those areas where we don't have as much of that, where people are just living healthier and longer. So the mind diet is a really simplistic, there's a whole graphic you can Google, mind diet. And that's the most recommended, most proven effective to help brain health.
My favorite thing about the Blue Zone diet is that it's simply named after the pen color they had. Like there's nothing about the science. There's nothing about a location. They just happen to have a red pen or a blue pen. And that was it.
I vaguely remember that from here and thinking that's good to remember because someone's going to ask me at some point why it's called that.
Yeah. Well, it gives me so much hope because you think when from the outside looking in, whether it's a scientific study or a successful business, you're like, oh, everything must have been thought out. And you're like, nope. Half of the stuff is like, we're figuring out as we go. That pen, okay, done. Mm-hmm.
So true, right? I was just talking to somebody recently, years ago when cigarettes were invented, like smoking was recommended, right? It was cool to do. It made you it help you lose weight. Like it was just a great healthful thing to do. And now we know better. And then similarly, I think, when sodas came around, they were like so thought of as being like such a treat. Here in Dallas, we have something called the Cooper Clinic. Dr. Kenneth Cooper, I may have mentioned this in the Yokozama, but he was a triathlete in the 50s and 60s. Or even before running was like really cool. He was a big runner and he would recommend people to start running. And he's quoted as being like the father of the term aerobics because he recommended a lot of cardiovascular workouts. And he almost lost his medical license. At first I thought that was like a folklore here in Dallas, but I've seen him speak many times. I've had conversations with him and he is very much like, yeah, I was threatened because I was saying something kind of so out of the box. And now we know that running is good. And I think we're on that same cusp about brain health and brain fitness. Is there things we know we can do? And some people will be like, well, is that it's not proven? Suddenly they want the absolute scientific proof, right? They don't ask for that taking a pill necessarily. But if I offer some recommendation, it's like, well, I haven't seen that proof, but we know that some things don't work and other things haven't been proven. So it is sort of this trial and error. Like we're all just trying what we think is helpful and it may eventually be proven helpful or not. But yeah, I agree. I'm always surprised when I look back and think, oh, that's how they got to that. Or even even medications. I think some of the first mental health drugs were found just because people who happened to be taking something for some physical disease suddenly had less depression or less anxiety. And they thought, oh, maybe this beta blocker that's helping the heart is helping the brain. And that's really how a lot of these things come about.
When you look at what's happening specifically in America today, what scares you the most about brain health or habits that people have that are impacting their brains and the vitality that they could have?
Gosh, I think that the point you bring up is so important that if we deny science or think science isn't important or research isn't important, but really it goes back to sort of like science is just about theories, like, right? It's things that here's what we think maybe is going on. And the whole idea of like the scientific method is like then testing that out and then being like, oops, no, we were wrong. And I think that's okay. Like to me, that's almost like development and learning and growth. I think it's sort of, science is so needed. And I think it's just, it takes so much, I think, for each individual to have their own scientific method approach of like, no matter what you hear, like questioning it and researching it. My favorite clients sometimes are like, oh, I'm sorry, I have a bunch of questions. And I'm like, my favorite client is the one with all the questions and the ones who have like done their own research and maybe are almost like adversarial of like, I found this and I read that. It's like, great. Like maybe I've read it too. And we can talk about it. But I think we've kind of lost that ability to have healthy debate or conflict of interest or conflict of opinion and just agreeing to disagree. Like maybe we'll just come to different opinions and that's okay. But things that can be proven, I mean, I think that, because even with the whole medication or the vaccine issues, right, they're so black and white where it's like people just believe partly from their own life experience or just from what they just believe without any experience. So for me, I think to the question of the thing that I find the scariest is, I guess what I hear the most from clients is people are very scared of Alzheimer's. And often it's like, unfortunately, fear is kind of the biggest motivator. So sometimes they don't come until they're scared or worried, like dad or aunt or uncle or somebody has something wrong. I'll often kick off my talks, and I think I did this at Yokozama. How often do you think about your brain? And oftentimes I do a scale like 1 to 5, and most people are like around sometimes, occasionally, or a few might say very often. But the ones who say very often, it's usually because there's been something scary, like their kiddo is ADHD, autistic, seizures, car accident, whatever. Their kids play sports. They're worried about concussions, or they've had someone with Alzheimer's, or they are at the age, or even just having issues of like walking into a room and like forgetting something. So, I think that's kind of the scariest thing, is that people are now being driven by fear as opposed to being driven by, again, like being more proactive, just like we know
prevention,
and like taking care of ourselves. And because if we are it's very realistic that your kids, our grandkids will all be able to live to 100. With medical advances, people are being kept alive much longer than they would have generations past. But who wants to live to 100 or 90 or 60 if your brain's not keeping up or there with you? So to me, if we don't pay attention to it now, we already think we'll have this whole epidemic of baby boomers aging and not having good brain health, and Alzheimer's is on the rise. But really looking at the science, it's not rare, but it's a disease of aging. It's much more common to have when you're 85 or older. There are some rarer ones that happen much younger, like frontal lobe dementia and things like that can even be in the 40s and 50s. But mostly we're seeing an increase because we're living much longer. So we have to, it's almost like an imperative that we do something to get our brains healthier so that we can live this longer life expectancy.
Yeah. And the things that people can do to be proactive, the mind diet. We also talked a lot about, hydration and sleep in the weekend, continuing to learn, right? And be social, basically just using your brain. Trying to keep stress down, right? Balancing the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. What else? What have I missed?
The only one I didn't hear you list is exercise, because we know that exercise creates BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotropic factor. And so I've heard it called miracle growth for the brain. It's literally what helps build neurogenesis. That's probably one of the reasons why maybe we are living longer, because most of us are getting more cardiovascular exercise, so our brain's healthier, but then we're not eating as healthy maybe, or all the other things that you mentioned. To me, I just see too is this, so all those things that we can control to some degree, right? We can make sure we can exercise, we can eat right, and we can do all things right and still not have optimal health. But sleep to me is such a key thing. We know that now during REM sleep is when the brain flushes out all these toxins that build up. So when people leave my talk, and I've listed all those things that you just listed, it's like, here's what you got to do, guys, easy. And people are like, okay, if I can leave agreeing to one thing you told me to do, what should I do? I'll often say, then just make sure you're getting 8 hours of sleep, meaning like restorative, restful sleep, so that you're getting those REM cycles. Rapid eye movement, when your brain is very active. Brain studies have shown during that time, the brain's just as active as when we're having a conversation like this. So during those times, the brain is flushing out through the cerebrospinal fluid toxins that build up in the brain. And we know those toxins are what leads to largely the tau proteins and the things that build up to cause Alzheimer's and cognitive decline.
Yep. So it's like a scrubbing. Your brain gets a scrub.
Yeah. It's like there's a New York Times that said, it's when the cleaning crew comes to work, but they only come to work during these REM cycles, which are only every 90 minutes. And the first cycle is the shortest, like 3 or 4 minutes. Every 90 minutes, it gets a little bit longer. So the longest REM cycle, the most beneficial REM cycle, is at like the 7th hour of sleep. And I have so many executives, and you work with high performers and leaders who are like, I'm fine on 3 or 4. They just aren't getting the restorative and needed benefits of really restful sleep. So that's one thing I'll often try to be on my soapbox about.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I loved that I took away from the weekend that you taught was clarifying even what I do, because I have so many interests and passions that don't seem aligned when you look at them separately. But ultimately, what I'm doing through my private clients or with Powerful Ladies is a lot of just optimization, right? How do we optimize you and your life? How do we optimize your business? Like, it really is about, I have a whole time management program, but if we're automating, delegating, or deleting work stuff, like, it really trickles into how we do it personally. I tried for a long time. when I first started, I had 3 buckets of clients: personal, business, or financial. And they all got mashed into one because we couldn't separate anything. And so it was really great to clarify that, being able to bring in that optimization word, hearing what, going through the brain science weekend, because I wouldn't feel complete working with a business or a client if their business was awesome, but their life isn't. Mm. And so all the things are always about, how do we make your business and your life thrive? Because they're so interconnected. You can't be a leader and be, acting out or being aggressive or being passive or any of the things, right? It really is about, how do you be on point? So it's been great to see that clarity and like really evaluate what I'm offering and not offering to people. So thank you. Mm. And you have a TED Talk that people can watch as well. What was the experience like doing a TED Talk? And was it like every other talk you do because you've done so many? Or was there anything special about that one? Because that's what most people know about versus all the other amazing things you're doing.
Yeah. So it was TEDx UTD back October, just a year ago. And, they'll often say, there's that great quote by Mark Twain, if I'd had more time, I'd have written a shorter letter. Because really, to your point of like being concise and having clarity around how we communicate and what we communicate is such a leadership skill, but also just a needed personal skill, because our brains are so limited in the attention span that unless we can communicate something pretty succinctly and impactfully, that someone's already thinking about something else within about 10 seconds. So we have such a short time to really get something across. So to be told like you have 18 minutes, to share something really compelling, it was really the hardest talk for me to prepare getting into it, because I could talk brain stuff all day, every day for forever. And so like when I was asked to teach the weekend, which was 2 8-hour days, first I thought, oh my gosh, it's so much. I can't possibly fill that time. And I had to cut out a bunch of stuff. So I just realized like there's a lot to say. So to feel like in 18 minutes, and at one point they even said, shoot for like 15. And I was like, that's like 3 words. Like, how can I possibly? And so it was just a practice of, drilling down to like what's most important, rather than feeling, because I guess I often feel also like an obligation to like tell everybody everything I know, to like share all my expertise or to just try to get to, like if I share all this, then maybe this much helps them. And so I've got to get to that, whatever might help them. And so it was such an experience in being okay with minimizing, which really helped me realize like it's better. Maybe it's more impactful if it's 1 or 2 big ideas rather than like 15 things that sort of land, and so then maybe nothing really lands. And it was just a fun experience. It was super stressful, but I remember just feeling it's been on my bucket list strangely, and then I was asked to do it, so it wasn't even something I pursued. But when I was asked to do it, I thought, that manifestation piece of like, this is so awesome. And you mentioned a great meditation for manifestation yesterday, which I love. So I'm all about that too. So I've added that to my listen list. So I think it was really just feeling just accomplished that I got something off my bucket list. And also to the brain science piece, it's all about harnessing stress rather than having stress hurt us. So I was able to drill down to just a couple of tools that seem really simplistic. But then afterwards, the speaker who was behind me backstage, he's like, I had people go through a really brief kind of deep breathing and reframing as some of the tools that I taught in it. And so afterwards, he was like, I'm going next. Thank you so much. Because I was so nervous, but you just helped me like totally prepare for this. So I thought, done. Like my work here is done. I've helped one person.
Oh, I love that. No, I'm literally addicted to anything that's going to make something better. Right? Whether it's listening to what ultra endurance athletes are doing or eating, or getting nerding out about why soil needs to be optimized. Like those are all my favorite categories. And the other one that I debate going back to get a PhD to like hang out in this area would be like what I'm really obsessed with, people who break the statistics to create things and success. Like, how do they get out of the cycle?
Those outliers, like Malcolm Gladwell,
yes,
like with the outliers.
Exactly. Yeah, because I think it's so fascinating. As you mentioned earlier, like everyone's unique story and path, which is why I also have this podcast. But it's really surprising, like the choices people make and the things that they're dealt from the beginning and what you make of it all. And the reframing part, I'm sure, has a lot to do with, I think that's one of the lead, I think you said similarities, right? Between successful people or optimists can reframe things faster. So I think it's all really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this whole podcast, Powerful Ladies, like, I mean, to me, as having a mom who was a super uber feminist and growing up thinking like, oh, that's kind of weird. Like, why did they be so weird about it? And now being like at that same age where I'm like, I think feminism or just being powerful as a female has evolved to where it's like, there are so many powerful and successful women, but then you hear about this just epidemic of imposter syndrome. Like many times I'll often talk about very transparently, before I got up for that TED Talk, I was literally like, I have no idea what I'm going to say. I shouldn't be here. Why did they ask me to be here? I'm going to get up there. I'm just going to totally freeze. And you have that moment of just complete, like, if they only knew that I don't belong here, that kind of weird self-doubt. And I just went through this whole year-long program here in Dallas called the Stegan Leadership Academy. It's a really well-respected deep dive into individual leadership and how you transform then to be a much more integrated leader. And, very powerful C-level people of huge companies had that same sort of sharing. And then what's beautiful is then men say the same thing. It's just not quite as talked about in the male circles, but to fully embrace our powerfulness and embody that and to move forward with it, I think is needed just as much as the brain health. So you're serving such a huge cause.
Thank you. Well, you read my mind because I was going to ask you, what does powerful and ladies mean separately? And then what does it mean to you together?
Oh, I love that. This is like the Oprah questions that she closes with. They're always like, people, but I forget what she calls them, but at her end of her thing, she calls them some kind of questions. I mean, powerful to me, I think it's hard to not have this vision of like Wonder Woman, right? Of just feeling like both physically, but also mentally empowered, strong, I suppose, effective comes to mind too. Leadership comes to mind as well. Ladies, I think sometimes I tend to be kind of hyper politically correct. So ladies maybe feels like so feminine, like powerful women. But I think part of that whole idea, and maybe I'd love to hear why you called it that. But I feel like I said to my last mentor, because she was very lady-like, more than I would expect like a neuroscientist to be. And at one point I told her, like, thank you for kind of embodying, being still feminine, being still like a lady, but also really smart and cerebral as well, and having really good thinking. And so together, I think it's that combination, that kind of uber combination of owning our femininity and our being a lady, because I think it's that male, female, masculine, feminine combination that's really most powerful. And so I guess to me, it's kind of the embodiment of both of those extremes, maybe into something really super extreme.
Yeah, it's very much like the yin and the yang sometimes. I mean, the truth of where the name came from was just that, like, I called my girlfriends like, hey, ladies, like it be the ladies. I don't even know where it started. I also, whenever I say ladies, I hear Missy Elliott in my head. Hey, ladies. Yeah.
I love it.
And I'm like, yeah, like it should be a party when we're hanging out all the time.
Yeah.
But it's been a huge conversation of myself and the team of part of the reason I didn't take Powerful Ladies from what it was 6 years ago to what it is today sooner is because I was stuck on the name. Like, I'm someone who has so many inspirational men in my life and male friends, and I worked in skateboarding for a while. Like, most of my life is not very feminine. Like, I'm actually quite bad at a lot of lady or girl skills, like hair, makeup, like, nope, I'd rather have someone do that for me than like cook. So, but for me, it was also about redefining what that meant, because a lot of people get uncomfortable with the word ladies. And it's been really interesting to see people's response to that question, because for some people, when they think powerful ladies, in their mind, it's like a bad haircut and a bad power suit. And other people hear that name and they think, Wonder Woman if she was a 1950s housewife. And then other people think it's totally different. So I like the ability to, by the nature of women redefining that phrase and showing that what ladies actually means is so much broader than the commercial, even Hollywood rendition of what it means to be a lady, and moving away from etiquette class and things like that. But I do think, we just had our podcast that came out last week was about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I think that she does a great job of kind of having those two sides of being such a force to be reckoned with, but doing it very methodically, doing it very, like she played the long game. I think there's a lot of power in knowing when to, as I said in the class yesterday, when to be the ninja, and like someone needs to, get a karate chop versus when to know to like almost play chess, know when it's okay to make these moves now, because later we're going to get the result we want. So to me, it's like putting all that together at the end of the day.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. You have to do your own podcast on that if you haven't already, because I want to listen to that.
Okay. I'll make a note. The Powerful Ladies podcast.
Yeah.
But really it started, as you mentioned, like I was doing a fundraiser, winning all the awesome women that I knew directly who I were inspired by to host an event. And I would call them, and 1 in 2 every other would say, I can't, I'm not a powerful lady. And I'd be like, wait, what? I'm calling you because I said you were by definition, but they didn't hear it. They didn't think of themselves that way. And that's where I was like, I'm not standing for this.
Yeah. Yeah. You're shifting that conversation. That's so cool. It makes me think about sort of, because I guess in some ways ladies feels formal, right? Like ladies and gentlemen. And I remember years ago doing a training where I used to work at, with a group of veterans it was at Fort Hood or at somewhere in Colorado Springs. And so it was mostly male because I worked with a lot of veterans and military. We did a lot of work with Navy SEALs and special forces. And so I got used to saying guys, like, hey guys, or you guys. And I think there was in one group I was in, there was maybe one female. And when I kept saying guys, like I didn't even mean the maleness of being a guy. Right. Like even to my dogs, like, hey, you guys, one's a girl, one's a boy. Like I didn't mean it.
Yeah.
And so I think there's almost like an over generalization of what the terms even, sorry, somebody's knocking at the door.
Okay.
of what those terms even mean. And then, I'll tell my dad, Jim, can you answer the door, please? And so, it's like an over definition or an oversimplification of what that term means rather than recognize like we are ladies. And so then let's make it powerful. Why not be powerful ladies and really embody that?
What are moments in your life that have made you realize how powerful you actually are?
Oh my gosh. I think back to times of like, for some reason, the first thought that comes to mind is just like breakups, right? Like you get your heart broken and you just think, oh, I'll just never be the same. And then I had one in particular really bad one, but feeling like I was sort of in this tunnel, and then knowing the light was at the end of it, and all the things I did, because I did a lot to get through that. I remember feeling kind of once I knew the end was coming of that, on the other side of it, and coming out of that, I remember feeling kind of powerful, having gone through it, and then almost on the other end of it being grateful for it, where in the beginning I certainly wasn't grateful, but by the end of it feeling like, oh, I'm glad I experienced that, I went through it and learned from it. Certainly things like, giving speaking engagements like that, even TEDx or keynotes that I've given. Well, my first keynote I gave a couple of years ago, I was the opening keynote in the morning, and the closing keynote was Shaquille O'Neal a couple hours after me. And sorry, he was the opening and I was the closing. So that was kind of a career moment of like, I'm on the stage that he was just on a little while ago. And that's kind of crazy.
I mean, he opened for you.
Sort of.
Yeah. We're just going to say,
we'll just say Shaquille O'Neal opened for Dee O'Neill. It was bookends. Yes. And just to be in the presence of the way he just owned the room. He could just, the keynote, which I'm sure he got paid 10 times as much as I did. But what he did was just tell his story, right? I mean, his whole thing is just, his life experiences. And I remember realizing kind of even in that moment of like, our lives are, everybody's lives, everybody's story is worthwhile in some sense and in some degree. So I think doesn't have to be some celebrity story, but just being able to frame your story in a way of, here's what happened. Here's the shit that happened. I'm supposed to curse. So here's all the shit that happened in my life and how I came out on the other end of it. And that makes a full story. I watched some kind of cheesy movie last night, and when it ended, I was just like, oh, that was so like textbook and kind of boring. I did a podcast a few months ago with a friend here in Dallas called The Remedies, where she also has people come on and talk about stuff they've been through and how they got over it. And I remember saying to them was like, when you meet people, the most interesting people have some crazy story. Yeah. They aren't one of the people who haven't had some heartbreak or some challenge. And I think that's what I try to tell myself every time I'm feeling scared or feeling like I can't do this, recognizing, God, the other side of this is going to be so rewarding. And I think I've never put the word powerful on it, which now I'm going to start to. I think I always just thought as like growth and sort of fulfillment, but I think if there's like a power bucket or, a power level, I think, it's up in that level each time. Even just going now through this layoff, it's scary, but at the same time, I feel powerful having now opportunities coming that I wouldn't have expected. And just dealing with it, like still getting up every day and like feeling optimistic and hopeful for what's next.
Well, from my own experience, I know that a layoff usually leads to somebody's best business ever that they've created themselves. So
love it.
That's usually an indicator where you're like, all right, the universe said I gotta go. It's my time. Well, and I think too, like thinking about the people who tell great stories, yes, they've usually had these like crazy highs or lows happening in their life. But I also think there's an element of people really being able to acknowledge themselves or what they've gone through and to tell their own story the way somebody who would direct their movie would. Like, we're so bad at giving ourselves credit for even the small things, right? Like, I'm sure for you, it was like, oh yeah, of course I graduated. That wasn't even like an option. It was just done. And somebody else would be like, oh, like I went through all this. And, I have a friend who surviving medical school is literally a survival. And so it really is this like high, up and down roller coaster. My boyfriend, Jesse, is on the list of like most entertaining people probably on the planet. And he tells these stories to the point where like, I know them all now. So of course I'm like, okay, I'm going to go do something else now. But he's just good at capturing like the high and the low and focusing there. And I'm like, I see this. I see what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and what I love about that, I saw some talk about it recently where that's the way our brains are wired. Like our brains are wired for story, like sitting around the campfire before we had electricity. That's how we communicate. We told stories, we shared experiences. And I think that's why we're still like enthralled and encaptured by great storytellers, because I actually gave a talk a few years ago about how our brain works. It was for a meeting industry conference, and they were talking about how storytelling is important. So I did all this research on it, and our brains are literally wired for visuals. Like if I were to say white elephant right now, you would picture a white elephant. You wouldn't see the words white elephant, right? So we're very visual. And so when someone's telling a story really nicely, we have this visual experience. And I think it's a whole brain at the same time. And I also think that with current thought leaders like Brene Brown or Simon Sinek, where it's all about being authentic and vulnerable in your storytelling or just in your life experiences. Like part of this leadership program I just came through, one of the coaches who was my coach and I've known for many years, he had a tagline of like, permission to be messy, which I'm like, messy? No. I can't write a messy email or be messy on stage. But I think that's so helpful to just realize like, we don't have to all be perfect. We don't have to show up and like say no one's going to remember every perfect word that you said, but how you felt about it. And to the Maya Angelou quote, like people remember how you made them feel and not what you said. And I think that's what really powerful storytelling. And I think that's why podcasts like yours are so relevant and important, because you're essentially just having a conversation, which fills that social bucket, but then it's people telling stories that other people can relate to. And it's just really relevant and powerful.
Well, and you made me think of it earlier as well, that the definition of discussion is thinking together.
Oh, is that right?
And I love that because to me, it fills in so many of the issues that we're having today because we're not discussing things enough. Like we're afraid to just have a discussion. But if you can think together, there's no way you can have a conversation with somebody and not leave some impact.
Yeah.
There's no way. So like what happens there?
I love that definition, thinking together, because also, again, I go back to brain science, like thinking, reasoning, problem solving, decision making is all that executive functioning, the prefrontal cortex, the front of the brain, which is only online when we're not really emotionally triggered or emotionally activated. And I think that's part of the issues today in our highly polarized world is, we're all just so upset and mad. And if we could just think together to find solutions rather than just an us or them kind of mentality that's so divisive that now if we could actually, because I think ultimately I'm always surprised, like, guys, I think we all want the same thing. Like ultimately, I think we all want the same, I think we're on the same team. Like, why are we fighting? So I think having those, if we can facilitate more of those kind of conversations, it's so needed right now.
Yes, the things that Americans fight about are privilege fights. If we really look at what we're disagreeing about the details. So, okay. And I think that's part of what's so important in leadership too, is to remind everyone like, hey, we agree on points 1 through 5. So let's remember that. And let's just talk about 5 through 10. Like it's not a black or a white thing. It's we agree on this foundation and then let's just figure out the top. So, but I love that you brought up being messy earlier. I have to coach people on this all the time. I say it, people get so nervous about messing up or not being perfect. And usually the people who are, from my experience, are the ones who like never will, like never. And so I tell people, I'm like, I want you to go and try as hard as you can to fuck this up. And they go, what? Horrified. Initially like triggered, horrified. And I'm like, no, try. Like, I really dare you. If you're trying, you're going to realize whole things that you didn't even think you like would be possible. Yeah. And, but there is something about that permission. And like, we think that there's things that we can't correct. And the truth is most things in life we can clean up.
Yeah. Or it doesn't even matter. Like, that's what I kind of realized. Like, I'm always, because I'm kind of picky about like vocabulary or grammar and then I realized when I would hear those words, permission to be messy, because, they were just about like, just share your authentic thoughts and your feelings. And so, but I'm the type to go back and reread emails just to make sure. And like, could this offend anybody in the universe? And then I realized like, gosh, like, my head didn't implode. Nobody else's head imploded. Like, we're still friends. And actually, I love that you mentioned this idea of like conflict, because, and in leadership, especially, one of the books that we read, I'm sure you're familiar with, Patrick Lencioni, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And
that sounds like a great book, though. I'm going to add that one.
Oh, it's such a great one, because there's this whole exercise on conflict and how really conflict is not only good, it's almost like necessary for growth and for optimization and for profit and success, I think. And I think I kind of grew up thinking like in a dysfunctional family, like conflict was bad. Like, I avoided conflict. And I think that's what made me almost like, and Melanie and I have talked about this at Yokozama, like, we want to focus on empowering women, especially because I think we tend to like shrink a little bit or feel less powerful when we're in a group of maybe just other men, C-suite leaders. And rather than allowing that to happen, recognizing like it's okay to like feel uncomfortable. And that actually it made me reflect back to relationships or even friendships. Like, when there has been some strife or some conflict, if you get through it, you're actually stronger on the other side of it. Yes. I have some of these friendships you might have where they're super surface, like never any conflict, but it's not really deep and it's not really strong probably. But the ones where there's been like some totally heated problems or issues, maybe even big blow-ups, getting on the other end of it, discussing, thinking together, working on it together, being vulnerable and emotional actually builds a stronger relationship.
You start to really see who people are. And to me, it ties into the conversation too of confidence. Like, people are always saying like, well, I'll do it when I feel confident. I'm like, yeah, but you can't be confident until you do it. It's like, there's the, in landmark training, they talk about be, do, have. Most people want to have something, then they'll do it, and then they'll be happy. But it's a complete opposite order. And so I often am telling people to go back to, I have a clarity exercise, and it has to do with going back to when you felt free. Like, were you a kid? Were you a teenager? Was it in college? Like, there's kind of 3 checkpoints for most people to look at. And we have to go back there because, we didn't have all the limitations that we put in front of ourselves then. But part of like you can't be confident by not taking an action. There's no way.
Yeah. It's chicken or the egg, right? The confidence doesn't come before doing it.
No. Everyone is horrified. Like, everyone's scared and freaked out. It's just who's willing to be scared and do it versus who doesn't. So we've done a really good job when we're in adult phase of avoiding all conflict and fear. And it's like, no, that's where the good stuff is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I talk about it, I think a little bit in the TED Talk, and I may have mentioned it at Yokozama weekend too, that it's all nervous system, right? Because when you're nervous and scared, it's like that sympathetic, that fight or flight is activated. And we want that sometimes. Like, that is when we get kind of all the juices flowing, and you need a little bit of it. But I love the whole Bruce Springsteen analogy that I often give, that because even now, whenever I give talks, I get nervous, but I'm able to reframe it. And the story that is recounted that I love sharing is he was being interviewed for a late night show, and they asked him if he got nervous before he performs. And he was like, well, I used to when I was younger. I would be sweating, I'd be shaking, I'd forget the words to the songs. And he said, but now I know that's just my body's way of telling me it's time to rock.
So good.
And so now when I have that feeling before anything, even before jumping on with you tonight, I have that same, like, what am I going to say? She's going to ask me questions. I won't know what to answer it. And then you prep by saying, like, you'll know all the answers, no trick questions. Yeah. But there's still that, like, but I have nothing to say, or I don't know what I'll say. And just recognizing, like, I'm nervous, and that's a good thing. I'm excited, and reframing it even to, like, this is the adrenaline. This is the sympathetic activation I need to perform at my best.
So speaking of your best, we ask everyone on the podcast where you put yourself on the Powerful Lady scale. 0 being average everyday human, and 10 being the most powerful lady possible. And I always like to know, where would you rank yourself today, and where do you think you would rank yourself on average?
Wow, the most powerful lady possible. That's such a good question. I'm going to start using that scale. Gosh, I think that, just catching myself at a good moment, and after our conversation, I think, and just where I am at the moment, I think I would give myself maybe a 8, maybe a 9, just because I feel like I am powerful for myself at the moment.
Yeah.
Relative, but also just time sensitive. And in the future, I mean, I think I vacillate between an 8 and a 10 on most days, of just feeling like if I know every day that I gave the best I could give, then that's as powerful as I can be. It may, the circumstances or outcomes or output may not look as good as I would like, but I think I'm becoming more forgiving and accepting of myself, that the outcomes are going to be relative, but all I can control is my effort and what I put into it. And so if I'm doing that up to my most every day, then I feel like that's as powerful as I can be.
I love it. Yeah, I do think there's definitely a psychological experiment that all these episodes combined would reveal with everyone's answer, because everybody answers so differently. And I find it so fascinating.
Yeah.
So as we're wrapping up today, is there anything that you would want our listeners to know about yourself, or what's next, or even just what you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that as our conversations continue over the next few years, and we get to do fun retreats and stuff together, which I know is coming to fruition, I hope, I hope that in a year or two, we look back and just say that, we're both feeling 10 powerful every day, but also that just from my business perspective, that the brain science is more accepted, that people are getting annual regular checkups, or even just being aware that it's a possibility. And that it's more easily accessible. And I would just hope that for myself, I hope to have just more of a mind body vitality myself, of feeling like not only am I doing all that I can do, but then I'm feeling all of the benefits of doing all the right things too. Because I think the Yokozama experience, as well as new career path or more focused career path, is all leading towards something. Through my leadership program, when I got laid off, one of my classmates sent 3 simple words or 4 simple words, because I was like, oh, I just got laid off. I was bummed. And he just wrote, "Dee, you will soar."
Yes.
And so that's become like my mantra, almost my visualization.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think soaring implies like a gradual improvement and just an endless possibility.
Yeah. And there's this great saying of like how you occur how other people allow you to occur. And how you occur to me is already someone who's like vastly soaring. So I look forward to like you catching up to how I see you and how the rest of the group sees you too. Because it's finding people in your life who, you know, I admire the cerebralness that you have and that you bring. But when you're sharing these topics that can be so complex or brand new to people, there's such an approachability that you put into that space for everyone to get it and to be able to apply it right away. And I think that's such a unique gift that not everyone has, who knows all the information. So for you to be someone to be passing this information on and to getting as many people to know about it as possible, it's like, I'm really excited what's next for you, because I know that the door is open wide. So I look forward to seeing what's coming.
Thank you so much for that. I absolutely love that. And I'm just so grateful and blessed to have met you in this experience, and look forward to our future adventures.
Me too. Well, thank you. Do you now have 1,000,001 additional questions about your brain and how it works? Me too. I can definitely tell you that since taking weekend 2 of the Yokozama training that Dee taught, I've been so focused on getting those 8 hours of sleep. I gotta keep this brain crisp. We're all up to big things, and to achieve those big things, we need our big brains to be on point. Brain care is the #1 self-care. To connect, support, learn more, and follow Dee, you can find her on Instagram and Twitter at NeuroFitNow. All the ways to connect with Dee, from her TEDx, her website, her LinkedIn, even her email. You can email her directly. Plus links to the Mind Diet and more are all at thepowerfulladies.com/podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Powerful Ladies podcast. There are so many ways you can get involved and get supported with fellow powerful ladies. First, subscribe to this podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. Give us a 5-star rating and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at Powerful Ladies. Join the Powerful Ladies Thrive Collective. This is the place where powerful ladies connect, level up, and learn how to thrive in business and life. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube page, and of course, visit our website, thepowerfulladies.com. I'd like to thank our producer, composer, and audio engineer, Jordan Duffy. Without her, this wouldn't be possible. You can follow her on Instagram at Jordan K. Duffy. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode. Until then, I hope you're taking on being powerful in your life. Go be awesome and up to something you love.